Everyone with us this evening. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Sabbath Collective, a community of people interested in celebrating the Sabbath and pursuing God through an Hebraic worldview of ancient scripture and current times. So tonight we will look towards hope in the story of betrayal, injustice, restraint, rejection, mocking, death, and resurrection. It is a story of Jesus come to earth, giving his life, and rising. So let me ask you this. Hey, Lisa, it's great to see you, honey. Shabbat Shalom. Why did Yeshua come? Okay, the big question. Why did Yeshua come? And I would present this thought. The purpose of Yeshua coming into the world was not about escapism, meaning the purpose he came was not so when you die, you fly away and escape this terrible, awful world. It's not about escapism or domination, which is this kind of thinking that is ruling over others, but the complete restoration of the whole world. And that is the purpose of his coming, which we need to understand. Yeshua HaMashiach, which means Jesus, as we say it here in Western Church. Yeshua was his Hebrew name, though. Yeshua HaMashiach means Jesus, the Anointed One. And one of the things that we need to really recognize about him, and I think we know it and we've heard people talk about it in churches, but it's really an important concept. And that is, he was tempted in every way. So Hebrews 4 says, for we do not have a Kohen Gadol, and that is Hebrew for high priest, unable to empathize with our weaknesses, since in every respect he was tempted just as we are. The only difference being that he did not sin. So this is a really interesting truth that I think many of us disconnect from when we think of Yeshua walking on this earth, and that is that there isn't anything that we have faced that he didn't face. There is nothing that he didn't face himself. And that's important. So we want to talk tonight briefly, and not necessarily talking about all the things that he faced, but some very real issues that he faced that we do too at his time of crucifixion. Hey, Catherine, it's great to see you. Shabbat Shalom. Tara, great to see you as well. Good to have you with us. So, as the one who intercedes for us, it's important that he understands what we feel, right? It kind of gives us comfort to know that we have an intercessor that understands what it is to be human, that understands what it is to have pain. He does. And we will see all the ways that he was tempted in this story of sacrifice and resurrection. And by the way, we're going to be looking at the resurrection in 2 weeks. And I'm going to be posting that we're going to do a Passover Seder and actually a social justice Haggadah, which is really going to be cool, next week. Lisa is going to be hosting it, and it's going to be on Zoom. So we're going to be posting the information on the page and in the group, and then I'm going to post a little shopping list tonight so that you can prepare and join us in whatever way you would like to join us for that event. It's going to be a really great thing. So let's look at the first thing that we see, which is betrayal. So Yeshua experienced betrayal. And I don't think any of us can say, yeah, I don't know what that feels like. I think we all get betrayal. It's an awful, awful jab in the heart. Judas was his Greek version of his name, Judah. Judas was one of the 12, and he was loved and entrusted by Yeshua. He worked alongside the other Talmudim, the other disciples. And Judas actually fell out of alignment with the vision of Yeshua. And I've done teachings about that before. It's really interesting. And it's kind of a warning to not stay in a place when you're no longer aligned with the vision. And I know many of us have felt that over the years. We just can't compromise anymore. Well, Judas was not in line with the vision of Yeshua. And he wanted Yeshua to be king and priest then. Okay, he had a messianic vision. And instead of what was to come, he wanted him to come this time as a king and priest and unite all of Israel. And this was called Zionism. So he wanted that now. And he did not want the servant and the sacrifice that Yeshua was always speaking about. A real sign of problems is that he began to steal from the treasury of the Talmudim, which is what they lived off of and what they did their ministry with and what they gave the poor to eat with. And that can only happen when you don't value the work. The only way that someone could steal from a ministry is if you don't value the work. Obviously, that was a sign, and Judas was doing that before he even betrayed Yeshua. So we can assume Yeshua would have felt betrayed, right? Even though he actually knew it was happening. We see in John 13:27 at the Passover Seder that they were celebrating, which a lot of Western church refer to as the Last Supper. It was the last time they ate together. He told him to do what he was going to do quickly. So Yeshua already knew what Judas was going to do, and he said, look, go do it quickly. So Judas went to the chief priests, and he agreed to hand over Yeshua in exchange for 30 pieces of silver. Now, there's a lot of prophetic ties with this 30 pieces of silver. In Exodus 21, we see 30 pieces of silver was the price of a slave. Isn't that amazing? And Judas's final betrayal was a kiss. Now, in ancient Hebraic culture, a kiss symbolized that there was nothing between us. When they did a kiss, they used to do it on both cheeks, like many cultures do today. And what that symbolized, it wasn't just a greeting or departure. It meant that there's nothing in between us. And Judas did that to point him out. And then Judas couldn't live with what he'd done. He tried to give the money back, and they wouldn't accept it because it was blood money. And so he threw the money down and ended his own life. So in the early morning hours, Yeshua is taken. Now, let me see what, I never connected the price before. Aaron is saying, hey, Mike Acevedo, good to have you with us. Hey, Barika, great to have you with us. Yeah, that's really cool, right? 30 pieces of silver is what the cost of a slave was. So, why this desire to kill him? Why do people want to kill a rabbi, a teacher? Why? Well, yes, he spoke truth to political and corrupt religious power. Absolutely, he did that. But there was really more going on here. And when we bring this out and look at it, you're going to say, not much has changed. You see, the religious leaders felt that he threatened their alliance with the Roman government, that they had a sort of in with the politicians, that they were protected, that they were favored, okay? And they didn't want to threaten their privilege and be on the outside. So these Jewish religious leaders felt like they were protected. They felt like they had an ear with the politicians. And there was a lot of corruption going on there, both ways. Same, right? And so they were very threatened by anyone who would expose the hypocrisy going on there. The fact that people were being oppressed, the fact that people were being marginalized. So it wasn't just that he kind of spoke to people and pointed something out. there was a lot going on here as far as political and religious leadership alliances. So like I say, right, there's really nothing new under the sun. Aaron's saying you mean Joseph. Oh, you guys are having your own conversation, so I'll let you do that. Hey, Ryan, great to see you, honey. So there was a rush for the authorities to get this done quickly before the Passover holiday, as at that point, thousands would be converging into the city to celebrate Passover. So they wanted to kill him quickly and secretly before more attention would be given to this travesty that they were about to do. His enemies wanted him silenced using any means necessary, including breaking the laws. Hello. So you're going to see again how much we see today in our world that happened at this time. So the other thing that he experienced besides betrayal was injustice. Now, this was neither an official nor was it a legal proceeding, okay? It was a farce. It wasn't a real trial, what happened with Yeshua. It was a farce that was assembled in the middle of the night by Caiaphas in order to quickly and quietly dispose of Yeshua so that no negative attention would be drawn to any of them. Alfred Edersheim, who's a biblical scholar, writes, all Jewish order and law would have been grossly infringed in almost every particular if this had been a formal meeting of the Sanhedrin. So there was actually too many infractions to even list tonight, but here are just a few of the laws that they broke during this proceeding. First, the Sanhedrin, which was the ancient Jewish court system, could not try a capital case, a case that would result in death, outside of their regular meeting place on the Temple Mount. Yet, this is tried in private, right? So that's one thing that they broke. Sounds familiar, Ryan is saying. Absolutely, very familiar. So they broke their own law. 2, no trials could be held on Sabbaths or feast days or on the evening before a festival or a Sabbath. Law 2 was broken here with what happened with Yeshua. Number 3, a guilty verdict could not be declared the same day as the trial. Yet, this was within a few hours. Number 4, conflicting testimony that the Sanhedrin would hear. In other words, 2 polar opposite eyewitnesses. And by the way, testimony at this time was eyewitnesses. You couldn't get up and testify unless you heard it or saw it yourself. So conflicting testimonies of false eyewitnesses is dismissed. So anything that conflicted should have been dismissed. Number 5, a defense attorney was appointed to defend the accused. Always. Yeshua had none. Those were just 5 of the Sanhedrin's law of court that were broken in this trial. Just 5. There's way more. We see in the presence of this injustice something powerfully important. And this is something that we sometimes miss when we read or listen to this story as well. Stephanie, reminiscent of the sham court proceedings in the South during Reconstruction and the Jim Crow area. Absolutely, Stephanie, right? Great. Again, nothing changes. Ryan, funny they were so mad about Yeshua breaking the Sabbath, but broke the Sabbath feast days themselves. Exactly, right? It's always about the hypocrisy. Hypocritical hate, as Ryan's saying, is what we see now constantly. I mean, it makes your head, it's so illogical, it makes your head explode. Same thing. And this was the court surrounding the arrest and then the the murder, really, of Yeshua. The next thing that I want to look at is restraint. Now, obviously, Yeshua was physically restrained, right? But here's another element of that restraint, which is really interesting. Barika was saying, I was thinking the same thing. Cool. So Yeshua was physically restrained, but it was actually love that restrained his power. So there was restraint in both sides. Restraint physically, that he was restrained, and then love restrained the power that he actually had. Now, here's a really interesting insight. Matthew 26, 59 through 64 says, the head Kohanim, that's priests, and the whole Sanhedrin looked for some false evidence against Yeshua so that they might put him to death. But they didn't find any, even though many liars came forward to give testimony. At last, however, 2 people came forward and said, this man said, I can tear down God's temple and build it again in 3 days. The Kohen Hagadol, that's the high priest, stood up and said, have you nothing to say to the accusation these men are making? And Yeshua remained silent. The Kohen Hagadol said to him, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Mashiach, the Son of God. Yeshua said to him, the words are your own. But I tell you that one day you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of Hagvorah. Now that's a Hebrew euphemism for Yod-He Vav-He, and coming on the clouds of heaven. So again, he refers to himself as the Son of Man, and he's sitting at the right hand of God. And so they lose their mind. Now, he remains silent about the false accusations about him, but he speaks to the future messianic coming. So he speaks a truth, a larger truth, but he doesn't defend himself. And he doesn't just call down angels and kill everybody either, which he could. Why did Matthew, though, write Yeshua didn't speak when at the end he actually did? Well, Matthew was actually making a connection here, which is the way that Hebrews write. Isaiah 53:7 says, though mistreated, he was submissive. He did not open his mouth. And this is speaking about the Messiah that would come. Like a lamb led to be slaughtered, like a sheep silent before its shearers, he did not open his mouth. So what Matthew did there was called a ramez, which is a Jewish form of study, and it hints of the deeper truth. And Matthew is connecting the 2 verses together to point to Yeshua the Messiah. So he's saying, okay, you remember that messianic verse that Isaiah spoke about, how the Messiah would be silent? Yeshua is being silent right here. He's not defending himself. He's the Messiah. Silent actually means, in the context of the Hebrew word, which this verse is connected with, a restraint of his power. So in Hebrew, it has less to do with a verbal response and more to do with the fact that love sometimes restrains power. Now, when my sons were younger, and if a son was bullied for a bit in school, and I heard about it and we would talk about it, love restrained my power. Love restrained me from laying hands on those little brats and their parents when they mess with my boys, okay? Because we had to use this as a learning lesson, and this would prepare them for life, and I didn't feel like they were in physical harm. I wouldn't have left them in it long, but we learned from it. So love can sometimes restrain. And Ryan and Anita, maybe you do this with with Lahava, when you watch her try to climb up on a couch. And she needs to learn how to climb, right? As babies do. And so your love restrains her. So you're kind of there in case she falls, but you don't pick her up and put her on the couch even though you can. Love restrains power often. And his willingness, Yeshua's, to be slaughtered as the Passover lamb in the face of injustice, when Yeshua is truth and justice, and does not react to those lies and this blatant injustice. They physically restrained him, but love's restraint produced freedom. Isn't that amazing? There's restraint from the evil side, and there's restraint from the love side. And from the love side, it produced freedom. The next thing that he went through, which we go through as well, is rejection. So now there's a choice to be made by the people. This is really, my hand is, Ryan's saying his hands is 2 inches from her back. Now there's a choice to be made by the people. And it is between the two messiahs. So the real one and the one the people think they want. Now there's a prevailing Passover custom in Jerusalem that required Pilate, the governor of Judea, to commute one prisoner's death sentence, and that was by popular opinion. So Pilate asked the people to choose who he would release. Now Barabbas is in prison for committing a murder during an insurrection against the Roman power. And the people didn't like the Roman government, so they liked Barabbas, even though what he did was criminal. Hello! Even though what he did was criminal and there was a murder that he committed during the insurrection, the people didn't like the Roman government, so they condoned what he did. I mean, again, nothing is new under the sun, right? Barabbas's name has an interesting meaning. Hey, Odane, great to see you. Hey, daughter, good to see you. Barabbas's name is Bar Son, which means Abba, Father, son of the Father. And Jesus had always referred to himself as the Son of the Father. So now, look at this scenario. We have two men. Each was known as the Son of the Father. However, Barabbas was acting more like their idea of a Messiah. And so they were going to cover over anything that he did that was unlawful or immoral because they wanted the same thing that he wanted. This choice is about how people see their salvation, and that shapes how they see their leaders. See, this was all about entitlement, wasn't it? And again, we see the same thing in our world today. What was the people's decision? Give us Barabbas, they shouted. Free Barabbas was what they were saying. What shall I do with Yeshua? Crucify him. Here's the really amazing thing here. In a broken society, Yeshua was an innocent man that was murdered, and Barabbas was a murderer that was set free. I'm going to give you a second to read that one more time. Again, all that we're seeing in our world today, it so mirrors this time, doesn't it? And it's so hopeful and helpful for me personally to connect to the fact that Yeshua went through every single thing himself. Mocking. Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing that we can kind of minimize, like, sticks and stones can break my bones, blah, blah, blah. But in the midst of unimaginable torture here, mocking is talked about more than the beating and the stripes. I think most of us know how they used to whip people, how they used leather, how they tied shards of metal and glass at the ends, and when they would whip them, they would then flip the whip and pull so that it would rip out chunks of skin. I mean, this was horrible. But yet mocking, the Greek word empezo, was actually talked about more than the beating and the stripes. And that's because mocking totally dehumanizes and defeats people, even more sometimes than the physical torture. Mocking is often used, as we've seen in our own country, as a tool of the military when they want their prisoners broken, right? 600 soldiers were mocking Yeshua. The crowds of people were mocking him. Again, they hated him because he was a threat to their entitlement, to their alliance with a corrupt government. Even the very place where he hung from the stake, he was crucified at a place called Golgotha, and its name meant the place of the skull. And in ancient times, these crucifixions were done outside of the city, and everyone that walked into the city would witness the people being hung there. And again, this was at Passover, so there was thousands of people that would be walking by him. The stipes is the vertical wood, and the stipes was left on the site of the mountain all the time. So when we see pictures of people carrying crosses, that wasn't actually the way it went. They didn't actually carry the whole cross. Mocking is used by former presidents during their campaigns. Exactly. 600 soldiers. Yes, Aaron. That's what I said. And the vertical stipes is left in the mountain. So you could just see this mountain was a mountain of shame and pain. The patibula was the horizontal. And that was actually, this was the patibula, this was the stipes, and the patibula was what was carried by the very people that would hang on them. It's like how people are made to dig their own graves, right? They had to carry what they were going to die on, what they were going to be nailed into. And they were hung naked and humiliated in front of everyone. Now, look at these connections. The Messiah was nailed to the stake at the 3rd hour, approximately 9 a.m. This is significant because of what would be happening here. There was Passover, and the morning lamb was slaughtered for the continual burning offering at this time. So the morning prayers were also to conclude on the 3rd hour. So at the same time as they hung Yeshua on the cross, the smoke from the sacrificial lamb and from the priest offering up incense flows up to heaven. Yeshua was the once and done sacrifice. That's the point. The veil is torn, Matthew 27:50 through 51 said. But Yeshua, again crying out in a loud voice, yielded up his spirit. At that moment, the paroket, that's the Hebrew word for the veil or the curtain, in the temple was ripped in two from the top to the bottom. And there was an earthquake with rocks splitting apart. The curtain that separated the presence of God from the people. So this curtain separated the presence of God from the people. So the people were way out there. And the priest, the high priest, was the only one who came here. What you're seeing here is the Ark of the Covenant. And that's what separated God's presence from everyone else. And it was torn supernaturally from the bottom, or from the top to the bottom. So Hebrews 10:19 through 20 says, just as the body of Yeshua was torn and life was taken from him, so too the curtain was torn, so that we might have access to the most holy place through him. So as his body is torn, so this curtain is torn. And that's what gives us access to the Father. It's a vivid dramatization of what the death of the Messiah accomplished. Access to God. Now, on the temple curtain was an image of 2 cherubim that guard the way to the presence of God. And as the veil ripped, a kind of way was made in between the 2 angels. And this strong image made such an impact that the earlier followers of Yeshua called their particular sect of Judaism, can you guess? The Way. So here we have the power of this story. And oh, how it relates to us today. Jim says overlap. Yes, absolutely. And he's saying, Jim's also saying about the overall Passover and Jesus' sacrifice, right? Isn't that a cool, amazing thing? An overbearing police force to mock one man. Exactly, Aaron. This is why I'm really kind of taking comfort in revisiting these very familiar stories with our eyes that we have now, because again, this is not the first time that this has ever happened, right? Stephanie says perhaps demoralizing someone is more effective because often there is no will to continue fighting. Exactly. Physical punishment can sometimes serve to make a person more determined. Absolutely. I'm thinking of stories of John Lewis. Absolutely. Yep, that's good. Again, that causes one to maybe get into good trouble, right? Because the pain actually motivates you. But I totally agree, Stephanie, with you that demoralization, dehumanization just sucks the very spirit out of a person. It's a very effective tool. And this form of death is extremely demoralizing and dehumanizing. Ryan's saying, all I can think about is the people that made the curtain, God knowing that there was a fault in the stitching however many years before when that curtain was made, knowing that this would be the event that finally compromised the curtain. I know, right? Because they made it to the exact specification of the Lord, the exact specification of the Lord. And that's really cool insight, right? That exact specification, because it was an extremely thick curtain the way it was woven. It was all these layers thick. If you remember, I did a study on all the parts of the tabernacle before. And it was so thick, it had to have been that there was a weak point. It's almost like, it reminds me of when the Spirit of God would lead the Israelites through the wilderness, and oftentimes people get this vision that a rock would just follow them around that Moshe would hit with his rod, and it would just spring forth water. But what people tell you, what archaeologists tell you now, is that there's these other underwater little cisterns and streams, and where the Lord led them was right over the stream. And so when Moshe went to that place, there was water there. So it wasn't so much that God made water go there, it was that God led them where the water was. And I think when we really relate to being led by that, it seems very encouraging and comforting to us. God sees the big picture, right? And he leads us in that way. So, in that way, exactly, the way. So, resurrection came through betrayal, injustice, restraint, rejection, mocking, and death. He not only knows what we're experiencing in these times, he's experienced it, and he's brought resurrection out of those things. And it's from that place that he is our way to the Father. We're going to close this time with the lighting of the Shavuos candles. And traditionally, the mother of the home lights the Sabbath lights of joy, of peace, of love, of unity. And then she encircles her hands 3 times, which is a symbol of welcoming in the day of rest. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, who gives us the eternal gift of restoration. Shabbat Shalom.